Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Mary Price. I'm the Events and Marketing Manager at the Shingo Institute at Utah State University. I'm so pleased to have Chris Butterworth with us today. Chris is an experienced consultant, a Shingo Master Trainer, and a Shingo Faculty Fellow. He is also an author and editor of several books, including the Enterprise Alignment and Results book sponsored by the Shingo Institute, which you can find online at shingo.org/books. Chris is also author of Why Bother? Why and How to Assess Your Continuous Improvement Culture, which you will learn more about today. Chris, thank you so much for being with us today. I'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much for organizing today, and welcome everybody from all over the world. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon. We've got a 20-minute session, so I'm just going to give you some high-level overview of what's in the book, and then glad to have a great discussion around the question and answers. So just very quickly, why bother is an in-depth guide to how to design a behavioral-based assessment system to assess the CI culture. It's lots of case studies in as examples from financial services, aerospace, logistics, electronics, food, telecoms. And all the author proceeds from the book go to the Black Dog Institute, which is a mental health charity in Australia. And the title, Why Bother? Is because I'm sure, like many of you, I do lots of assessments. And often people chance, why should we bother doing another assessment? You know, is this just something that's going to create extra work for us in head office? And so we thought, well, actually, let's think about why and what the value could be. So a big thank you, first of all, big thank you to my co-authors, Morgan Jones and Peter Hines. A big thank you to all the contributors, several who are on the call. Ken Snyder for writing the foreword, and lots and lots of people that helped us throughout the years. I was thinking about how many assessment interviews have I done, and it's in the thousands. So every time I do one of those, I learn something from the people I'm talking to. So thank you to all those people who helped to form the thinking in the book. So it's not an audit. You know, that's the key thing. Audits are something that kind of people think they're being checked up on. Someone's here to check what I'm doing. And I had an interesting conversation with someone recently. Oh, well, every time there's an audit, I just hide everything under the bed. Okay, so that's exactly the wrong kind of behavior that we're trying to drive. So what we really want to do is think about what's the purpose here? How do we turn it from something that is seen as a burden and extra work to something that's seen as really valuable, and people get something out of it and actually welcome it as a system that they can benefit from? So how might we do that? Well, like when we think about any system, be really clear on the purpose. Let's sit down and say, okay, why do we want an assessment system? And one way to think about it, and we use this throughout the book, is think about it in terms of plan, do, check, act. So an assessment system, in many ways, is the strategic check. How do we know if what we've launched is working well, or if it needs improvement? So we'll plan it, we do it. And we see lots of planning and doing, especially in continuous improvement, nowhere near enough check. And the check is not an audit check. The check is, let's learn. What do we know? What can we find out that's working well so we can replicate it? What do we find out that's not quite worked as we thought? Because there will be some things that haven't worked as we thought. So that we then go back to plan and adjust. So be really clear on why we need that system, what its purpose. It's a learning. It's part of our learning and development system in many ways. Then say, who are the customers? Who are the customers of the system? And it's not the continuous improvement team. You know, many of these systems sometimes set up so that this continuous improvement team can justify their existence in many ways. Well, that's actually the wrong way of looking at it. The customers of the system are actually the leaders and the people in the business. So if we're going to design this system, we need to engage them in the voice of the customer activity and say, what is it that you really would value from this kind of system? And typical things that they say when you ask that question is that they value the insights that can be achieved. They value the recognition that can be given. They value the guidance, and they might value the validation of, we think this is okay, can we have an external view on it, or an assessment view on it. But it's really important is to understand who the customer is and what they value, and then design it with those values in mind. And also to really think about, like we should for any system, what's the ideal behaviors we want the system to drive. So we don't want it to drive competition of chasing a particular number, so it just becomes a tick in the box exercise. What we do want it to drive is curiosity, seeking understanding, encouraging people to strive for the next level in the maturity assessment, no matter where they are now. So that we actually want it to encourage that hunger for improvement and celebration as well. We want it to encourage people celebrating what a great job they do. So there are all things to bear in mind when we're putting the system together. And there are many elements to this system. So if we think about that, typically it might be a big annual assessment, maybe even 6 months. It might be at a business unit level or a site level. But that's only one aspect. You know, if we do it as a one-off big event, it's a year since we last did it, or 6 months since we last did it. A lot of things will happen. We're trying to capture everything all at the same time. So actually, it needs to have lots of subsystems that feed into that overall system. And they might include things like maturity assessment systems, process maturity assessments. And there's a great case study in the book on process maturity. It might include area self-assessments that are done at a team level, departmental level, maybe even an individual level. And it could include leadership team assessments. So are our leaders being assessed or even assessing themselves against the maturity expectations? And we could even extend it out through the whole value stream and supply chain. Now, I think the key is not to see these as all separate things. They should all be parts of the same system, or working towards the same purpose and driving the shared behaviors that we're trying to achieve. And there'll be many more levels to this too. So I'll link it back to the Shingo insight of ideal results require ideal behavior. The input for that is key behavioral indicators, and the outputs are great results measured by KPIs. Now, what assessments often do is focus on the outputs. So how many visual management boards have we got? How many people have been trained to certain levels of standards and capabilities? So instead, what we really need to do is think about how are we measuring inputs, because those KPI measures just tell us a moment in time what we've achieved, and often don't give us a real indication about sustainability or behavior. So what do we really need to focus the assessment on is the inputs that deliver those. And another second Shingo insight is that purpose and systems drive behavior. So whilst we need to think about this for the design of the assessment system, it applies equally to any system that we're looking at. And what we often see is that a system is designed with no consideration of the behaviors that we're trying to achieve. As a result, the system doesn't quite work as we expect. And then people find workarounds. We get lots of variation and unreliability, and then managers redesign the system. But when they redesign it, they'll redesign it without any consideration of behaviors. And what we end up with is a vicious cycle of variable results and unpredictable results. And we constantly fighting and trying to work out why it's not working as a consequence. Alternatively, what we could do is start with what are the ideal results that we're looking for. Let's then define the ideal behaviors and key behavior indicators that will give us those ideal results. When we've decided on that, we can then have a go at designing the system that will deliver these. We then manage and review the KPIs because we might not have got the system design exactly right, and then refine the system as needed. If we do that, we're going to get much closer to ideal results. So constantly keep that design in mind so that we are able to refine the system and refine the behaviors that we're looking for, which will move us through maturity levels. Think about it. I'm sure many of you have already spotted this. This is a plan, do, check, act cycle. We're planning based on behaviors, designing based on behaviors, managing based on behaviors, and then refining the system based on behaviors. One of the key things we need to think about is that when we talk about behaviors, one of the ways that behaviors can be observed is in the kind of conversations people have. And the kind of conversation we see at the various levels of maturity changes. It's a great indicator as to what level of the culture is within an organization. So, typically the maturity levels will be over 1 to 5, 1 to 4, and the aspiration we want to have is, well, no matter where I am now, how do I get to the next level? And so when we're talking to people, how we exploring and observing them when they're doing go, look, see, or Gemba walks, what kind of conversations are they hearing? What kind of conversations are they having? If it's just started, it's likely to sound very noisy and stressful, complaining, maybe lots of criticism going on, maybe lots of finger pointing. As improvement culture starts to come in, it's much more energetic, a lot more persuasion, a lot more contentious. Is that really the right way to do it? Is there a better way of doing it? And quite a lot of advocacy and challenging and insisting, actually, no, there's a standard here, we might want to follow that standard. Which then would get us into the stage 3, where we've got standardization, it's calm, there's a rhythm, we're not running around all day trying to work out what's happening, we've got some stability in our day, there's a calm conversation, a drumbeat to work to, lots of suggesting, explaining, diagnosing, coaching. And then when we get to the higher levels, more into the 4 and 5 levels of way of life, you can feel it. You get a sense that there's some humming and buzzing when you walk around the organization. Now I go to places at these levels and I immediately get a completely different vibe when I walk into the offices or the shop floor in those kind of organizations. There's lots of inquiry, lots of diagnosing, lots of positive challenges. The questions are not around, why can't we do that? But how can we do that? Let's find a way to do it. So part of our assessment system also needs to be able to think about, well, what kind of conversations are people having? And how are we measuring those kind of conversations? How are we assessing them? And I mentioned plan, do, check, act earlier. Developing an assessment system, and I think developing any system needs to be thought about in terms of plan, do, check, act, because things like change, external environment changes, some things in the organization's strategic objectives might change. So we've got to be constantly reviewing it, making sure that it's still up to date and relevant to the organization and the customers of the system. So that, we at a very high level, we go into details throughout the book in this, but get a consensus on the purpose of the system, secure sponsorship. And by that, we don't just mean people giving tacit support, I mean people actively promoting it and understanding it and being champions of it. But draft a high-level view of the system. Start training some assessors. And this is an interesting one as to who should we have as assessors. Initially, we might need some real experienced expert people. But actually, we should think about the assessment system as a training and development opportunity. So how do we second people into assessment teams? How do we get leaders to take part in assessments so they really understand what's needed in their own areas? So we strongly recommend never having this as only a dedicated, fixed, central team that does assessments. It's really got to involve as wide a number of people across the organization as possible. Do a pilot and feedback on the results, review that. What's the lesson learned? What's the sponsors telling us? Build them in, and then have another go. Now, one of the challenges that we often see is people want to make something like this perfect before it even starts. And my provocation would be, I don't think you're ever going to know it's perfect until you have a go at it. And tell people, look, we're going to do a bit of an experiment. We're going to try this and see what results we get. And we're going to learn from that and improve it again. So lots of choices to make around, well, where do we start in our assessment? Should we do a team? Should we do a site, do an area? And there isn't a magic bullet answer to that, because there is only one true answer, and that's it depends. It's all about context. But some tips is, well, what's most important? What do we really need to know? Are we testing our improvement system? Are we looking at how we can help that particular site move to a new level? And so there's quite a few questions to ask, which we give in the book to help us to guide where should we start. And then, build up that assessment team, build up the knowledge across the organization about what the assessment is and how it works. Lots of comms around it, understand and refine the system further. And then you can undertake assessments at scale and really build it into our business. And that would include things like the assessment results being a key behavioral indicator on leadership's visual management boards. Where are we on our results? But again, the focus should avoid being on an absolute number. Should be on what stage in our maturity are we at, and have we got clear actions in place that take us to the next level? And that's an important mindset to get into people's heads, and an important way to design the system. People might want a number. There's lots of challenges saying, oh, I need a hard number. But the focus should not be on number. The focus should be on what are the key actions that are in place that take us to the next level. So that's the kind of conversations to encourage when we start using the system and we start getting people to measure against it. And it can even, it works at every level, at a team level, department level, site level. What's the action plan? Let's talk about what we're doing to improve on where we were last time. So the book's available on Amazon, and that's just about 20 minutes up that I wanted to do, because I thought I'd leave quite a bit of time for some questions and conversation. So I'd just like to open it up to people on the call.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. All right, first question. Do you have recommendations on rating systems? I heard you mention staying away from absolute values, but when evaluating a landscape of plants, do you have thoughts on various approaches to consider?
And I think sometimes it might well be necessary to come up with a number and to create a scoring system. But what I would do is position that inside a maturity matrix. So, for example, you take the shingle levels of 1 to 5, where 1 is not even started and 5 is way of life. And that's the framework that I would use and we recommend in the book, is to say, okay, where are we in those stages of maturity? Because there's a big step up between stage 2 and stage 3, because that's really where we see many organizations get stuck at stage 2, and they have to really put a mindset shift into working on the culture in order to get to stage 3. So I think it's valuable for people to understand that this is a journey over a number of years, and what stage am I at now is key, as opposed to the exact number. Now, we can put numbers in, they can be useful, because it might say, actually, you're just about at the start of stage 2, or you're just about at the start of stage 3, but try and get the focus on where am I in those 5 levels.
Thank you. Next question. How do you start the discussion around KBIs as a measurement method?
Well, I think a really great way to start that is to talk about have we got any in the organization at the moment which we don't call KPIs? So many people do. So for example, the employee perception survey is a KPI because it's measuring how people feel and behave. The key thing about it is, how is it used? So it could be we do one and we report a number. Okay, it's not really an effective KPI then. What do we do with the results? How frequently do we do it, and start making it a more useful KPI? So you're just explaining the concept of it. But also, I think it's important to go back to the Shingo Insights and say, well, if we want ideal results, we need ideal behaviors. How do we know whether we've got ideal behaviors if we're not measuring them in any way? So most leadership teams, when I put that provocation, we go, oh yeah, okay, we know our role is to manage culture. You know, how do we see culture? We only see it through behaviors, and so therefore we need to start introducing key behavioral indicators that tell us how well we're doing in our culture.
Thank you. Next question. Can you speak more on the self-assessment component?
So if I understand the question, I think it's important for people to be able to self-assess, so there's not a sudden surprise. No? So a team of assessors turn up and give them all these results that it means nothing to them because they just don't understand the language, or they haven't understood the purpose. So one advantage of self-assessments is that people get used to what's being looked for. They understand, a very important aspect, they understand what they need to do to get to the next level. So a self-assessment is self-managed in many ways. It might only be a cut down version, but it's more about getting people used to the idea of, let's do a check in our plan, do, check and act. We're trying to get that mindset in of check and act and self-assessments. So we don't want them to be auditing. We do want them to be understanding that, how do I know if I'm doing it as well as I could, or if there's a better way of doing it if I don't check it? And what do I check it against? I need some criteria. So giving people high-level descriptors of what behavior looks like as you go through the levels, of what kind of things you'd expect to see at the various levels, helps them to self-assess.
Great, thank you. Next question. What do you see as the key issues stopping an organization from transformation to an improvement culture?
How long we got? Key issues I think would be not thinking about it in terms of a cultural transformation. So what I mean by that is going with a mindset that it's about just implementing some tools, rather than standing back and saying, deliberately deciding we want to embed a culture of continuous improvement. Culture being the key word. Therefore, we need to change, understand what behaviors need to change. And that actually needs to start with what I call a look in the mirror time for the senior leadership team. What does that mean for us then? This is not a change that other people need to do on their own. What does that mean for us in the way we need to change our behaviors? What's the role model behaviors we want to set in the organization? So I think, one of the big reasons why where it doesn't work is where people haven't actually had those in-depth discussions about behaviors and leading those behaviors. Which is why we're suggesting in the book, the assessment systems really need to focus on the behavioral aspects of continuous improvement.
Thank you. Next question. How do you get your assessors all on the same page, since it seems like this is a subjective assessment process?
Great question. To some extent, I would argue that any assessment is subjective. And the challenge is how to make them less subjective. One answer that I know someone tried to do was develop an assessment system that had hundreds and hundreds of questions in it on the basis that thought it would make it less subjective. It didn't. That's not the way to do it. What's really key is to, one, keep it fairly simple. Keep it as simple as you can. And also to ensure that you've got lots of calibration in the assessment system. So a mini plan, do, check, act within that. Well, what we're doing is assessment teams might have might have 5 or 6 people, depending on the size of assessment you're doing. What's important is that there's a methodology within that for calibration during the assessment. So what are you seeing? What am I seeing? And actually put in an assessment system for assessors within that. So, you know, if we've got someone who's consistently not in line with the colleagues in terms of the way they're seeing things, what coaching do they need? What help do they need? But you can't just expect, for example, we'll put everyone in a room, we'll give them half a day's training, let them loose in the organization and expect that we'll get consistency in the way that they assess. So there's got to be an ongoing process for assessing assessors and calibration of those assessors.
We have lots of questions about KBIs, and this is one we get often. It says, do you have a standard list of KBIs, something as a baseline?
No. So, it's a really good question. You know, I can give lots of examples, and in the book we go through lots of examples of key behavioral indicators. But to pull a list off the shelf would be like pulling a list of KPIs off the shelf for any organization, and they really need to be thought through about what they are for you. So start with, what behavior do I really want, and what KBI might give me the indication of that behavior. But a couple of tips on KBIs. Now, they'll often only need to be in place for as long as it takes to get behavior. So, for example, at a very local team level, one team I saw had a very easy KBI about people being late to the visual management board. So all the names were up there, and if anyone was late, they got a cross against the name. And if they were late 3 times, they had to buy everyone in the team a cake. And that was because that was driving a simple behavior of don't be late to the meeting. So 2 people ended up buying the team cakes, and then they stopped using the KBI because they didn't need it anymore, because no one was late to the meetings. Now that might sound a very simplistic example, but they work. So at a team level, what do we need to get the behaviors we want in our team? At an organizational level, at leader level, it might be things around, well, okay, we're going to go and do lots of Gemba, lots of look, listen, learn. Who's the customer of that activity? Well, it's the people that we're talking to. So how are we assessing the quality of the conversation that's happening in those Gemba activities from the eyes of the customer, the people that are being spoken to? And actually, there's simple ways of doing that. We might do anonymous surveys. Might do one organization and does anonymous net promoter scores. Would you really rate the interaction you had with the leaders on the Gemba activity? Yeah. So what we're doing here is looking at it from a different way. One way to think about KPIs is we're measuring the quality. Often in CI, we measure the quantity. How many of this, how many of that? Rarely do we spend enough time thinking about the quality of what's happened. And I think KPIs give us that opportunity.
Chris, this is the last question that we have time for today. This person asks, can you share some successes of working in a virtual environment on how to influence and engage teams in gathering and tracking data when there's no formal process in place?
Great question. It's a challenge for all of us in these virtual worlds, but I have been really impressed over the last couple of years how teams have been able to adapt really quickly to a virtual environment. In fact, I know several teams who are saying, well, actually, this is better than it was, and we're probably going to keep a lot of our virtual environments in place. And a question at the end, that question was, there's no clear process in place. I think the answer is, well, let's actually look at how we get a clear process in place. How do we make that process simple? Even though we're in a virtual world, we can still collect data. And I've done many virtual assessments, for example, in the last 12 months or 2 years. So we just have to adapt the approach. It involves a lot more preparation. It involves, for example, watching recordings of the virtual meetings rather than being physically present in every single meeting. And I found that actually virtually I can get access to far broader range of data and information than I can doing a quick visit to a site, because you can watch, you can watch several monthly management meetings.
Chris, thank you so much for presenting today. It's always a pleasure speaking with you and learning from you. Before we say goodbye, please remember to check out our website at shingo.org/events for information on future webinars, workshops, and the 34th Annual Shingo Conference, which will be held in Orlando, Florida on May 19th and 20th. If you're unable to attend in person, the conference will be available in virtual format as well. I hope that you'll all attend. Thank you all for attending today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.